Is the federal government trying to put a pinch on the big, bad, mean, awful, annoying, greedy corporations in America? That's what they want you to think. But do the numbers kind of tell a little bit of a different story when it comes to home ownership and inventory and investment properties? I'm Chad Anderson. This is More Than Mortgage. Let's bring in Mr. Zack Jones. There he is.
Hey.
How are you, man?
Good. It's good morning.
It is
And
hard to
one of my
believe.
favorite topics.
Hard to believe this is episode 5 already.
Yeah.
We have a lot of fun doing this. I hope
Yep.
you guys do as well. First thing you can do before we get into this, like, subscribe, hit that stupid little bell so that you know whenever we post content or go live or whatever we do. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can find us easily right there on the screen at This Chat Is Real, at Zack Jones Loans. We'd love to have you join us, engage, interact, comment, and so forth. We're just going to keep rolling, but we have a 3-year-old that needs to go potty real quick. So, nothing like recording. And then there you go, buddy. All right, run off. Well, let's just hope he hits his mark. All right. So let's get into this. Is the government punishing corporations, or is this a head fake? We've seen a couple of posts out there, a couple of articles talking about, oh, yeah, big United States government, big, strong. We come in, take care of the little guy here, knock out the big bad corporations and, do all these great things for the little guy. But is that really what they're doing, Zack?
Well, so this is a new piece of legislation that just kind of hit the books here, sponsored by several lawmakers, that's trying to put the pinch on corporations and corporate ownership, specifically of single family homes, condos, townhomes for rental purposes. So we've all seen, there's a 60 Minutes piece out there. It's pretty scathing review of Tricon Residential. There's a lot of articles at the turn of the beginning of this year in 2023 about these big hedge funds, specifically, the big names, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards, that are stacking up all this cash to buy rental properties, and how many properties they bought last year and 2021. And then there was this big scare about the corporation's going to own 40% of single family homes in America by 2030. That was an extraordinary claim. And I think I never was in any way believing that was going to happen, because those numbers are just too unbelievable. But we all know where houses have sold to these corporations, especially those of us in the Sun Belt across the southern United States from east to west. That's where these companies seem to be concentrating their efforts, and they buy these houses and fix them up and then rent them. And they're making a lot of money doing this. The difference right now versus coming out of the recession when this whole thing started is that they seem to be holding on to these houses a lot longer. It used to be, 3, 4, 5-year deal, and they're just holding on to them because they cash flow great, right, and it's a good business model. So as affordability has gotten pinched, and a lot of people lost out on houses during the pandemic with really low inventory, the focus kind of laser sighted on these corporations, because, hey, this guy, I can't beat this corporation. They're coming in with cash offers, right, and they're offering over list price, and I just can't get in. So the unfairness of corporations buying houses in your neighborhood and mine became an issue. How much of that did you see, Chad?
I'd go back real quick to your talking about buying up things, fixing them up, and then renting them, right? Like, we've seen some of that in downtown Nashville, where there are entire buildings that are built only to rent. Like, right, you can't even buy the condos or the apartments that sit inside of the buildings. The only option is to rent. There's a piece of property in Alabama that I'm familiar with where this was done the exact same way, where a builder came in, developer builder, they came in and they were able to build 114 houses, and the cost to do so, land, housing, everything, final cost was going to be about uh, what was that? It was around, say, $12 million. Okay. So at $12 million, then they're able to sit here and collect rent in that area, $1,500 to $2,000
Yep.
a month.
That's a
Well,
great return.
if you
Great
just do
return.
1,500 times 114, that's $171,000 per month.
Yep.
If you took 12 million and you divided that by 171,000, that's only 70 months that you recover your entire investment. So if you borrow against it, obviously you're way outrunning any kind of a loan you get.
Right.
You just got cash flow burning. I mean, into your pockets just every single month, cash, cash, cash. And then think about this, Zach. At the end of the day, you still have the asset.
Right.
It's not like you have cash flow only. If you ever get in a spot, well, you can exit and just sell everything, or sell half, or sell some, or start putting them on the market, sell them to the people that you've already rented to. So, yeah, this is something that's just really, really interesting to see. I personally, though, was shocked at the number, because you read the bill, you read the legislation, and you go, okay, wow, the government's kind of stepping in here and trying to
Right.
take down some of these bigger groups that are monopolizing. And I'll share the graph here in just one second. But Zach, I also it's tough for me because I love America. I love capitalism,
Right.
right? If somebody can figure out a way to make money legally, then it's a free and open market. So I struggle sometimes when we start putting laws in place just because somebody outsmarted the other.
Right.
Now, if you leveraged government people and you were a lobbyist and you paid to play, okay, that's different. But if you're just a corporation, and you and I both have some rental properties and beach properties and whatnot that we do Airbnb with, but we don't have 500 of them. We have a couple of them. And when you do those things, I look at it and I go, wow, if I was really, really ambitious in this direction and wanted to build, like, you could kind of get lumped into that same group or that same context of, oh, just this big corporate guy. So, like, I get conflicted
Yep.
on this, because I didn't lobby anybody in Washington to hook me up or help me out. Like, I took a risk, and some of it paid off on a couple of houses. But let me guys tell you, running Airbnbs, I've lost plenty of money too. Okay. It works both directions. And I'll share this, but when you look at it, I'm just shocked by this.
Shocking.
Right? Like, I'm blown away by this.
So the true numbers as we understand them now, and I think that there's some things to be read into this too, and I'm going to go into this in a second. But your mom and pop investors, this is grandma and grandpa or your parents who decided that they were going to buy duplexes in the 70s and 80s and rent them out for positive cash flow in their golden years. This is people like Chad and I who run a few little Airbnbs and do that as a side hustle. These are mom and pop investors that, might own 20 or less properties. 80% of the investment properties in America are mom and pop investors. You've got larger regional investors that may go in and they may be developing some townhomes or apartment buildings or something like that, or buying multiples and trying to concentrate on a specific area. They may be larger regional entities that do, Section 8 housing. They specialize in Section 8 housing, governmental contracts, that sort of thing, 14%. But when you get into this corporate ownership, as we understand it, very important, you've got a smaller national companies own 3%, and then the big boys own 3% of these properties that are designated as investments. Now, where I get a little bit suspicious of this number, even though it's extraordinarily small, what I don't understand is how many of the corporate investors may be operating as a smaller national or a regional investor because they've carved properties off and bought them in LLCs or
Right.
DBAs. That meaning it's kind of like maybe a shell company of some sort. I think that we've recently discovered with some particular political figures that there were as many as 15 shell companies deep in order to hide assets and transfer of funds. So certainly these companies could go in as Maple Street Investors LLC and Oak Street Investors LLC and buy these properties. And to your point, Chad, about this new construction, I would imagine that, Glen Oaks LLC might go in and buy, 15 or 20 properties in the Glen Oaks subdivision development of 1,000 homes or 500 homes. And they may be actually BlackRock or State Street, but they went in and bought 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 homes in a particular development and are operating those specifically as a separate company, and they're flying under the radar a little bit. So maybe these corporate ownerships are a little bit higher than 3%, but it's still an extraordinarily small number. Now, Chad, have you heard anywhere about what this number actually translates into in terms of ownership of homes? What's the number?
I haven't. I've just seen this percentage, but you're right about the LLCs and the shell companies, because I know people who have multiple LLCs or shell companies layered and stacked on top of LLCs. And then you could even go as far, before you answer the numbers question, you could go as far as to create a trust and then store LLCs in a trust. And then you could have shell companies inside of a trust. And by the way, when you create LLCs, it doesn't have to be like Zack Jones Airbnb LLC.
Right.
Like, you can name it whatever you want. You can name it a series of numbers. You can
Yep.
name it your name. You can name it. I could go create Zack Jones Loans LLC, even though it's Zack Jones's name. I could own the LLC. Like, there's
Right.
nothing that really prevents you from naming it whatever you want, which, to Zach's point, kind of makes it harder when you're trying to identify, okay, well, who owns this one? Okay, well, who are they a part of? All right, what shell company? Okay, but that one's in this trust over here. But then this one is, oh, this one's a subsidiary of this parent shell.
Right.
Wait, and then there's another trust that contains the trust that contains the, you can get into this spider web of ownership. So sometimes these are hard, but I would still, even if these are fractionally correct, if your margin of error here is just a couple of percent, a few percent, whatever, you can finish up with the number thought. But this, like you said, even if the margin of error is factored in, I expected this grid to be more like corporate owns half.
Right.
Or a fourth, like when you see the bill and the legislation, that's what I think of is like, oh my God, corporate owns like half the housing of investment properties in the US. And then you see this, I'm just kind of blown away.
And you'd think it was millions and millions and millions of houses the way that this has been promoted by the press. But what we're hearing is that's about 600,000 units. So that's a lot of houses. And maybe it's a lot more to be considered when you think about most of that. I'm speculating about this, but a lot of it being concentrated in the Sun Belt.
Hey,
But
remember,
when
Zach, though, last week we talked about there's 8 million people ready to buy right this
yeah,
second.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Averaging about 5 million home sales a year. So 600,000 homes is a fraction of the homes in America. And when you break all this down, so there's this idea in this legislation, and I haven't dug into the legislative aspects of it. I've heard some people cite some things, so some of this is hearsay. But there's a speculation that there's a 10-year window for these corporations to figure out what they want to do with these assets, and then if you own over a certain number, I've heard it said maybe if you own over 100 units, then you're considered a dangerous corporate investor, and you're going to be taxed at an extraordinary rate and penalized for that ownership of single-family homes. And this is in an effort to protect American homeowners. So I know what you're doing. Go. Your audio, I can't hear your audio.
Well, you can't hear my audio because my 3-year-old's in here talking still. So, all right. So to circle back to what you're talking about with the number of units you're allowed to own, do you know? I don't know the answer to this yet, but do you know, or have you read anything? Because this goes back to the LLCs. So if you're a corporation and the United States government says, "Hey, you own over 100 units," you're going to get slapped. It's going to be a major penalty, fine, whatever the case may be. What's to prevent that corporation at the end of the year to be like, "Yep, we sold off 50 here and 20 here. We've only got 30 left." But then you start digging, and the LLC that bought 50 of the houses is the same owner as the corporation. All it did was transfer on paper,
Right.
or it transferred to the spouse's name, or it transferred to a business partner's name who wasn't on that LLC, but then that business partner who also owns real estate over 100 units, you just swapped. Like,
Right.
I'll sell you 100, you sell me 100, and we'll just call it a day. Like, that's obviously going to be talked about, or a loophole, is it not? Like, I'm curious to see how that's going to come into play.
If I were some really savvy corporate lawyer, I would know exactly how that needs to be done, so that it's effectively would be very difficult to trace without, a lot of investigation expenditure by the IRS,
Yeah.
because these are different companies. They may all be ultimately owned by, BlackRock. We're going to pick on them because they're the big evil corporation. But if you've got 100 unit limit and you own 150, what would keep you from divesting 51 of those into different LLCs or trusts, all of which file their own tax returns and are separate entities? It'd be very hard to find those. So, and again, people have been working on this for a long time, and the loopholes are in place for a reason. I mean, we can't be naive about the way that corporate structuring and tax structuring is set up. So I don't think that this thing has any teeth if a corporation really wanted to keep more than 100 units and the legislation actually went through and it was actually enacted and it actually lasted for this 10-year period of time, that corporations be able to work through it. But I say all that exact way because, number one, I don't think that it'll ever get enacted, because I think it's posturing by politicians in an election year to try to convince their constituents that they're quote unquote doing something. And to that point, a very similar piece of legislation was introduced in June of this year, June of 2023, that proposed to do exactly the same thing. And we saw the headline and then nothing. I don't even know what happened to it. So this is a different group of politicians that's proposed this second piece of legislation. So I don't pretend to think that there's not these wink, wink, nod, nod kind of agreements that are going on, across the aisle that says, hey, we're introducing this and it doesn't really have any teeth and we're going to vote it down. It's never going to go anywhere, but we got to pretend like we're doing something here. I think that goes on in politics. I also think that if it did get passed, then you got a 10-year window, and who's to say that the repeal of this particular bill or this particular piece of legislation wouldn't be chunked into page 9,000 of some defense spending bill in 2030 before there was ever any teeth to it, and it just went away suddenly and people forgot about it. I just don't think that I think that this is the summary of everything that I see about legislation like this. I don't think that the government is in a position to solve this problem of housing affordability from a government intervention standpoint and creating more regulation. I believe that, and I was reading an article over the weekend on this, and I think that the better concentration, I have to give credit to this particular outlet because I didn't expect it from them, just because of the way that they present their politics. But they did say, it's our editorial belief that it would be better for politicians to look at the barriers to increasing housing inventory through lower regulation, through exceptions to or lessening the environmental regulations that affect so many things about the home construction industry. The blocks that certain states have to development of land, and then the raw price of materials, Chad, to think about the regulations and taxes on the lumber industry and what we have to import, what we can grow here, what we can harvest here, under what situations and circumstances we can, and then the taxes that are inherent to that. Materials costs are one of the primary contributors here to this. And then, we've got labor costs on top of that, and labor availability, and then the development costs. I know that specifically in California, it can take 10 years or more for a developer to be able to take a piece of land and get it through the permitting process so that they can go in and scratch the dirt and put in foundations. And that's why you see so much of the development in California is so high density. They're not putting single family homes on property anymore because it's too darn expensive. They got 10 years of expenses in a quarter acre lot. They've got to,
if the market is still strong to make it worth it at the end.
It's unbelievable that you can build a new construction home in some of these states with these such high regulatory costs and long-term development costs. You think about going out there, if you were in business and you were going to spend $10 million or $15 million for a plot of land under the potential promise that you might be able to build on it after you've paid for that thing and paid the interest on the loan for 10 years and all the permitting. It's unbelievable.
Wow. I feel broke just listening to you for the last 90 seconds.
So I'm skeptical that the government can do more in terms of imposing more regulation and creating more layers of government intervention, and that's going to reduce costs. I just don't ever see a situation where that's happened. I think it's the lessening of regulation and the backing out of these sorts of things that really needs to take place. Now, the corporate ownership, like you, Chad, I'm conflicted about it because I hate the idea that we've got first-time home buyers out there who are not able to buy a home because, some giant corporate entity went in and bought every single family home in a neighborhood, and they literally made a neighborhood for rent. We've got that going on in Nashville, Tennessee, where there are single family homes that are built ready to occupy. And in this market, I'm skeptical that there may be a lot more under construction that we don't even know about, that they never hit the market and somebody went in and hit one of these big corporate builders and said, hey, let's make a deal. We want to buy everything at 90 cents on the dollar that you've got ready to go. And they say, how many do you want? Because we need to put houses in the ground and make some money. We'll make 10% instead of 20. This is a good deal. I think we're going to see a lot of that emerge.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. We'll keep you up to date on any of these kinds of stories and articles and rules and whatnot that kind of pop up. But most importantly, stick with our content, and we're across a lot of platforms, as you see on the bottom of the screen there. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube are our primary three. Zach even dabbles with the kids on TikTok if you want to go there. He does. Yeah, a little bit. But make sure you follow us there. He is at Zack Jones Loans. Mine is at This Chad Is Real. And you truly can help us quite a bit, especially on YouTube, if you go in and like, subscribe, and hit the bell and follow us for our content. Also engage here with comments. What do you guys think on all this stuff? Is this a thing where big bad corporate really is evil? Or after seeing these numbers, do you reset your brain a little bit? Like, well, maybe corporate ain't that bad as what the picture gets painted. And the government, great, they're stepping in and helping, I guess, a little bit, but it's not really enough. Hell, my neighbors are part of the 80% who own all these houses all across America. So, are they fixing a problem? Is it even really a problem, or is it just something to beat their chest about? Love to know your thoughts or comments or feedback on all of that. But thanks for joining us. It's 5 episodes approaching the new year as well. Can't wait for 2024. It's going to be a good one. So for Zack Jones, I'm Chad Anderson. This is More Than Mortgage. Thanks. Have a great rest.